Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to host you here in Tranent. It's appropriate because, you know, it's a great venue we've got here and it's a great town. But it also encapsulates the real issue why we need Scottish independence. Because Scotland is energy rich and yet our people are fuel poor. Just along the road there's the Colgate. It's a poor area. It registers in all the indices. There'll be many people there in fuel poverty. The majority of people there, I would hazard a guess, will probably be facing fuel poverty, as indeed will many across the whole town and county and the rest of Scotland. Many will be on prepayment meters that actually compounds the injustice because you pay higher charges, higher tariffs, as well as higher standing charges. There's no basis for that. If you speak to the energy companies and say, could you get rid of it? Absolutely. What do you require? Ofgem need to just tell us to change it and we can do it. Those of us on debit accounts, we would have to pay a marginal fraction more, but you would wipe out the anomaly that they pay more. It could be easily done by SSE, Scottish Power, anyone. And you go to Ofgem and you say, we'll do it. And they say, well, we can't. We require instruction for government. And you go to the Tory government, what do they say? It's a matter for Ofgem. All it takes is a ministerial pen and you would wipe out the injustice that people cannot afford to heat their home. And let's remember that these people on prepayment meters are having to go out and buy a card or £10 or whatever. By the time they put that in, they'll find most of it has gone on standing charges. They won't even be able to heat their home in many instances because the standing charges accumulated and takes what little they have acquired. That is just disgraceful. And let's remember that fuel poverty isn't just about heating your home. There is a disgrace that we're all now wearing more pullovers, and that's a good thing in some ways. We do have to address the use of energy. But people who cannot heat their home, it goes beyond that. You can't power your phone, which you might require for employment. You can't power the laptop that maybe your child is given to help them, to try and allow them to prosper. You can't wash your kids' clothes because you want to try and keep them respectable. In some instances, you can't even put on the dialysis machine that they require for life. So this is hitting all of us. But it's not just hitting those in urban areas here in the community. Here in East Lothian you have the absurdity about heating oil because many people in the villages round about here aren't on the gas grid. A lot of Scotland isn't on the gas grid. Huge towns, large towns like Hoyk and Gala aren't on the gas grid. But here in the villages, people aren't on the gas grid. So what does that mean? It means you're dependent upon heating oil in the main. Over 200,000 households in Scotland are dependent upon what they call unregulated fuel, because gas and electricity can be capped, as we're seeing. They can have support given. But what's done for heating oil? The rise in heating oil has been larger and higher than that of electricity and gas. Now, some people affected by it might be an architect-designed homes. More likely it's to be in Granny's Heelanhame up north or in an old rural agricultural worker's cottage down here. They're not well insulated, they're hard to heat, and yet you're paying a greater sum. And what's the Tory government done to support them? They're giving £100. That won't even wash the sides of many folks' heating oil tank. It's certainly not going to be able to allow them to buy it, because to order, you've got to get at least 500 litres of fuel for many of the companies that supply it. If you don't buy 500 litres, and if you're not buying in bulk, it's at least £1 a litre. Where's somebody on pension and benefits going to be able to access the money to be able to obtain the heating oil? So this is affecting all of Scotland. That's what we face. And actually, it's not just individuals. I was speaking to the Chief Executive of the Council. How are they going to heat venues? How are you going to hold venues like this open? And I've heard great works, we're going to have to open up venues so that we can have warm rooms. Yes, we should. But how's the council going to be able to afford the bill for every library, every community centre when it's rocketing through the roof and they're getting cut back? And what's the impact going to be in the hospitals when you go to visit a relative and they've got the heating turned down and they're going to tell you to bring your own blanket because they can't afford to heat every room in the hospital? That's what we face because there's no provision that's adequate to be able to provide for them. And that's the Scotland that we face. And yet here in Tranent, we're energy rich. Scotland is 25% of Europe's offshore wind asset. A lot of it's coming ashore at Cockenzie and indeed just at Tranent. We've got 60% of the UK's onshore wind. We should be laughing all the way to the bank. In Scotland, something like 97, almost 100% of domestic electricity supply comes from renewables. We have got renewables coming out our ears. Do you know that we're now putting in more wind turbines onshore? And I agree. But do you know that in recent years, 17.6% of turbine usage has been switched off? The problem is we've got so much energy in Scotland, but we can't get it south, and they need it. But they can't get it down the grid because there's grid capacity. So what they do is they pay companies to switch off their turbines. So when you see turbines standing there not turning, they're actually turning a coin for the operators, because do you know, they get paid more not to turn their turbine than they do for turning their turbine and handing it over. And because energy costs increase in winter, they get paid more in winter to not turn their turbine than they do to provide it. Now, there is a solution in Scotland. There is a solution. Some of it's being dealt with by the Tory government. What they're doing is cabling it so the energy goes down south. I don't mind that, actually, if we actually got some benefit from it, if we got some payment for it because it's on our land or it's in our waters, but we're not getting even a dime. But there is something else you can do, which I was speaking to the Chief Executive about. You can store it. Anybody who's investing in solar panels will be told we're actually invest in a battery. It means when you've got the energy, you can keep it and then use it so you don't have to pay more when the sun's not shining. If we actually had batteries, and there are batteries, they're not the size of what the battery will be for a solar panel, they're more like a container-sized vessel, they can hold the battery and you can then put it back in. Equally, you can also provide hydrogen, because hydrogen is something that you can then use, because what do you need for hydrogen? Go back to my O-grade physics. You need energy and you need water. Well, you've got surplus energy, and here in East Lothian, you're not that far from water. And what do you do with the hydrogen? Well, in Germany, they run buses on it. In Germany, they run trains on it. I actually speak to Lothian buses, and you'll have seen we've got some electric buses. You ask them, what sort of buses would you like? Hydrogen, actually. We don't actually like electric buses. You plug them in, you start them at 6, and by 2, we're actually having to plug them back in again. We prefer hydrogen. So there's all those things that you can do, never mind the fact that you can get hydrogen heating homes. That's why there's a disgrace going on. We are not getting the benefit of the energy off our shores. We should be laughing all the way to the bank. But of course, that's the fault of the Tory government in terms of what they're doing to our energy policy. But I have to say the behaviour of the Scottish government has also been shameful, because they put the offshore wind up for auction. They called it the ScotWind auction. Now, I've been to many auctions, and usually you put your hand up and go to the highest price. But what did the Scottish government do with the ScotWind auction? They put a maximum price. Most places I've seen there's been a floor price, so you can't go below. If you're not going to get, you know, my magnum of whiskey and get at least £100, I'm taking it back, or something like that. But no, they said you can't pay more than this. And so they put out the tender, and they got £700 million. And I heard the First Minister say how wonderful that was. Well, £700 million, it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. But do you know what happened? In the United States, there was someplace off the Long Island, the New York area there. They put up 25% of what the Scottish government put out to auction. 25%. And do you know what they got? Not 700 million. They got $4.3 billion. Now, of course, with the collapse of the pound, the exchange rate's still changing, but that shows you that we were sold out cheap to big companies. Now, of course, we get told by the Scottish government we're going to get supply chain jobs. Oh, aye, are we? I spoke to Scottish Power, because you know at Tranent going down A1, you see on one side Tranent, and on the other side they're building a big transmission station, because that's when the energy comes in ashore from the offshore wind. It's then going to get cabled south to Redcar and other places. Do you know how many jobs that's going to create? Well, so far in the construction, most of the work's gone to labour from north of England, or indeed from the west of Scotland. Good luck to them, but it's not going to local people. But do you know when it's built? Do you know how many jobs it will provide? 4. 4 jobs. Except maybe in the annual refurb, when they might go up to, say, 30. But they'll probably be bought in from elsewhere. So where's the trickle-down jobs? And the Scottish Government said, well, we've asked them to make sure that they would get a they would get more chance for the auction if they put in for a higher percentage, so they specify 50%. And I went to the government and to the energy producers because we know that Forth Ports are advocating to be able to assemble offshore wind turbines, not to build them, to assemble offshore wind turbines at Leith. And I take a big interest in that because I was born down there, the East in general, and I know the area. My family were from near there. You ask them, you say, well, see when these turbines come in and they're assembled at Leith, how are you going to apportion that? How will you decide whether that's 80-20 or 50-50? Well, do you know what they've done? It's self-assessment. So the people who are actually making money, they'll be able to say, oh, well, that's 80-20, or it's 70-30. They can call it what it's like. Actually, the high-paid, high-skilled jobs will be manufacturing the turbines in the Netherlands or in Teesside or in Indonesia. We'll get assembly-type jobs that will be low-paid, low-skill, and yet they'll be able to do that, and there'll be little checks. We got sold out on oil and gas, and we're now getting sold out on renewables. We should be taking that back into public ownership. We should be providing electricity, if not free, certainly at low cost. The annual charge, or the actual charge at the present moment for electricity in Scotland, what producers of renewable energy get paid is something like £48 per megawatt hour. But the charge that you'll pay for your electricity and your gas is regulated by what the European gas price is. The European gas price is something like £460 per megawatt hour. So the fact is, some people are making a hell of a lot of money. We are not being able to get affordable electricity. There's something far wrong. And all that's now been worsened by Kwarteng's budget, because she is taking from the poor and giving to the rich. This must be the worst budget in UK history, if not in the modern developed world. We're going to see interest rates rise. We're going to see small businesses and big businesses fold. We're going to see unemployment rise, and we're going to see homelessness develop because interest rates are going to go up 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%. They're talking about 6% by next year. That's the base rate. That's not the mortgage rate. The mortgage rate's higher than what the base rate will be because there has to be a profit margin factored in. But of course, that doesn't mean some people aren't making money. My son, eldest boy, works in the bank, and he was telling me he picked up chit-chat from bankers in Singapore about how it's a good time to go to the City of London. The pound has crashed. There'll be Mr. and Mrs. Chang or Mr. and Mrs. Putin actually saying, now's a good time to buy some property on the banks of the Thames or one of these new builds in London. I was going to get 5, but maybe I'll get 25. Do you want to let it out? Well, maybe not bother with the hassle. I'll maybe just keep it as security. And when they're coming over, maybe they'll go and buy some jewellery. They'll buy some top-end cars. And of course, they put the money into the bank. And some bankers are going to get a profit because the money's going to be going in and out of there, along with a lot of drug money and other dirty money. But people will be making money. But the people paying the price will be the people in Garval, Gifford, Ormiston, Tranent, and the rest of Scotland. Whether it's big cities, whether it's small towns, whether it's villages. We're getting crucified and it can't go on. So what do we do about it? Well, we can stamp our feet and we can say the people of Scotland won't stand for it. I heard that from Ian Blackford. Didn't work. Didn't work. We can listen to Pete Wishart. Johnson will blink. Boris will blink. All he needs is one more mandate for the SNP. By Jove, his eyes will pop out his head. He'll blink. I blinked. He blinked in the 1922 committee. I used to, in the devolution referendum and back in the independence referendum in 2014, joke that how my parents had hated Ted Heath, and then actually when Thatcher came along, Ted Heath became the defender of ordinary people. He became the embodiment of decency, and this was a man in 72 at the miners' strike that people were castigating. Now we're looking back and Boris Johnson is benign. Johnson wouldn't be as bad as this. That's what we thought when Johnson came in. Good Lord, bring back Cameron. He wasn't as bad as this. Truss will be in for a while. All this idea, what's the latest idea from Ian Blackford? Recall Parliament. To what? Stamp your feet. See if she'll blink. It won't change. They're not going to call an early election. They're not going to roll back on what they're doing. They're going to tough it out for a while, and ordinary people in Scotland are going to pay the price. That's why we can't go on like this. It's just unacceptable. That's why we've got to make a stand. We can't go on just taking mandates and then doing something about it. People are literally going to die this winter. Kids are going to go hungry. And of course, people assume, I now see it was being referred to by Tasmina, a tweet from Ian Blackford, it's in the polls. The SNP after the next election will be official opposition. That won't heat a house in Colgate. That won't provide heat and oil in Garville. That won't provide a job for somebody whose business goes bust and we're told just hang on for another mandate or whatever. And equally, I remember 1980s. I remember when nobody thought Thatcher could get back. In 1981 and 82, when Leyland was closing, when the steelworks were shutting, when Honeywell was going, when driving down the AM8 was going like down a morgue, nobody believed that Thatcher could get back. But along came a war. Oh, did I mention a war? Well, that's not going to happen now, is it? No, perish the thought. We've just put £2.9 billion of weaponry into Ukraine. What's that going in for? We only managed £190 million for humanitarian aid to Pakistan. Why is Pakistani lives worth less than Ukrainian lives? So I don't rule out, it certainly looks that she's gubbed. She deserves to be gubbed and wiped out. But you can't take anything for granted. And we can't take that long to get round because we're losing our industry, we're losing our people, people are losing hope. And that's the importance of these things. We've got to make a stand. We haven't voted Conservative in this country since before I was born. She has got no mandate in this country. She was rejected in 2019 because she wasn't on the ballot paper. What she's put forward certainly wasn't put forward by a prospectus. What was put forward by the prospectus has been rejected. So what we need is action. That's why we've got to get out there demanding that this is changed. I hope that we get a referendum next year. But let me say, I keep speaking to fellow MPs in the Scottish National Party and I'll look at what the Tories are doing and saying and I'll say, well, we've got a referendum, eh? You'd expect a big smile. What did I get? A sheepish look. It'll be all right because we'll get a referendum, won't we? And they look away and they look at this. I was 20 years a defence lawyer. I don't have to like my clients, but I have to do the best for them when I go into that court for them. That's the least they're entitled to. We've not been dragged to the Supreme Court by a British government overruling a democratic decision of the Scottish Parliament. We've had a Lord Advocate that's volunteered up our position so that they can consider it. The Scottish National Party is ebullient because they've had their written submittings heard. Well, as I said in an article, it's probably worth more than me sending them a copy of the Beano or the Dandy. But the fact that the written submissions have been heard, well, they'll be read. So the Daily Telegraph over the cornflakes of the presiding judges. So don't give me how important it is that the SNP managed to get their arguments into the Supreme Court. If we're successful in the Supreme Court, I'll eat my proverbial hat, as they say. We are going to, because we have got a Lord Advocate that has gone there, not defending it. She doesn't have to believe in what we believe in, but she has at least to stand up and speak out for it. Instead, we get the legal equivalent or a political equivalent and the constitutional equivalent of my client advises me. My client tells me. We know how very difficult it is, but if you've ever set something up to be booted right out of the park, Dorothy Bain has done it. So I hope that when this comes up in the Supreme Court, it's successful. But if it isn't, that's not the end of the story. Not the end of the story. We do not have to go on like this. We have to draw a line in the sand and say this is simply unacceptable. Scotland is energy rich. Our people will not be fuel poor. We ain't taking it anymore. In every legitimate democratic way, we will fight and oppose, stand up, because enough is enough. We're not taking it anymore.